Hey, what's up? It's a good dog and stuff, and oh, actually, you know what? No. Actually, wait, this is a reaction video, so fine. First I was gonna say I don't want to see my face, but you know what? It's fine. I've listened to this before, but it gets me every time, so let's start. Yeah, let's start.
I bet as you were sitting there in your snuggly-wuggly little beds, thinking to yourself,
"Oh, yay! Mike forgot to do Sweet Apple Massacre! Yay!"
no, I did not. I was just waiting. Ladies and gentlemen, today's Klopfic is going to be called Sweet Apple Massacre. Many of you are familiar with this, and I am going to make it fantastic because I am going to do the voices to the best of my ability. So strap yourselves in. Shit's about to get very, very real. Here we go. Sweet Apple Massacre. Big Macintosh surveyed the many apple trees that made up Sweet Apple Acres. It was nearly Applebuck season once again, and it looked as though they would be having a bumper harvest this year. He nodded, satisfied. His sister Applejack walked up beside him.
Oh, boy, howdy. I sure am glad you ain't injured this time, Big Macintosh,
She said.
Why, there's even more apples on them trees than last year.
Yup, Big Macintosh replied in his characteristic manner. Them's a lot of apples. Applejack was silent for a moment, enjoying the feel of the slight breeze against her blonde mane.
Say, I don't suppose you seen Apple Bloom anywhere, have you? I've been looking for her all day, and she ain't nowhere to be found.
Big Macintosh shook his head. Sorry, sis, can't say I have.
Darn, that silly filly's probably gone off somewhere with her friends. I just hope she ain't getting herself into any mischief, or else there's gonna be hay to pay.
Don't you go worrying yourself, Applejack, he replied. I'm sure she's perfectly fine. But anyway, I need to get back to the barn. I gotta go press some apples for some of my home-brewed apple cider. I picked a few apples earlier especially, all nice and plump and ripe. They ain't gonna press themselves. Applejack laughed.
You sure do love your cider, don't you? Just make sure Apple Bloom don't get her hooves on it again. We all know what happened last time.
Big Macintosh chuckled along with his sister. Yup. The large red pony trotted back to the barn and gently closed the door. He opened a trap door with his mouth and went down the steps into an old, disused apple cellar. Usually it was just filled with junk, scrap metal, old worn-out plows, old rope, and various other bits and bobs that had outlived their usefulness. Big Macintosh often came down here when he wanted to get away from the world, to withdraw for a little while for some peace and quiet. Today was different, however. The old rope, at least, had found a new use, because in the cellar space were Apple Bloom and her fellow Cutie Mark Crusaders, Sweetie Belle and Scootaloo, bound and gagged, propped up against the wall. 3 pairs of scared, round eyes looked up at Big Macintosh as he approached. Now then, y'all 3 fillies, he said, as placid as ever. Y'all gonna learn a lesson. You need to learn not to mess around with Big Macintosh. All I want is some peace and quiet, he said, looking directly at Apple Bloom. The little red-haired filly cowered under his gaze. All I want is a quiet life without all y'all Cutie Mark Crusaders running around the place making with the noise. When I'm...
Have you heard of headphones? There's headphones. Yeah, there's headphones. There's headphones. Buy some.
finished with y'all, there's gonna be no noise from you ever again. As Big Macintosh approached, Scootaloo flapped her wings, struggling to get off the ground. Big Macintosh laughed and grabbed one of her wings. He twisted, at first slow, watching the pain visibly grow in her eyes. But then he tore hard, smiling slightly when he heard the snap and the muffled whimper that came from Scootaloo. He then threw her to the ground. Your wings are useless, you silly filly, he said pleasantly. He then went to a toolbox and took out a rusty knife with a jagged blade and dropped it in front of the 3 fillies. I'm going to take off those gags now, he said. The first one of you to scream gets their tongue cut out. He took off Sweetie Belle's gag. She looked up at him with terror, but managed to stay quiet. Next was Scootaloo. She let out a strangled whine and was breathing heavily, still in horrendous pain from her broken wing, but managed to resist the temptation. Finally, he removed the gag from his sister Applebloom. She stared at him with her large, round eyes, filled with fear and incomprehension. This was Big Macintosh, after all, her big brother and the gentlest of souls. Wasn't he? Surely this was a horrible joke, but she had seen what she had done to Scootaloo's wing, and it was definitely no joke. She took a deep breath.
Applejack!
Big Macintosh shoved his hoof into Applebloom's mouth, silencing her scream. He sighed and shook his head. I told you not to scream, Applebloom. You should listen to your big brother.
I'll scream, and scream again, and Applejack will hear, and...
Applebloom said flatteringly. You know, I kinda hope you do. After all, I still ain't forgiven Applejack for that injury she gave me last Applebuck season. If you want Applejack to join y'all down here, scream away. I, for one, would welcome her company. But now, to business. Big Macintosh picked up the knife and loomed over the cowering Applebloom. He pinned her down with a powerful hoof and stuck the knife into Applebloom's mouth. Sweetie Belle vomited at the sight, the thick yellow chunks and acidic-smelling liquid splattering heavily onto the floor. Scootaloo managed not to be sick, but rather gasped and sobbed and choked with panic. Big Macintosh forced open Applebloom's mouth and with some effort cut out her tongue. Applebloom tried to scream, but her mouth was too full of blood, so it was more of a muted gurgle. After a short while, she collapsed, tears streaming from her eyes, falling unconscious from the shock and the pain. Big Macintosh then took the tongue and rolled it in the puddle of putrid vomit on the floor. He smiled at Scootaloo. You hungry? Scootaloo shook her head vigorously and cast him a defiant glare.
If Rainbow Dash were here, she would kick the crap out of you, you maniac!
Big Macintosh shrugged. Well, she ain't. And anyway, I wouldn't be so sure about that. Rainbow Dash ain't as tough as she likes to make out. He shoved the vomit-covered tongue into Scootaloo's mouth and used his hoof to clamp her mouth shut. Don't you go trying to spit it out now, he said calmly, with a little laugh as the filly struggled and squirmed. Didn't your mother ever tell you how important it is to chew your food? Scootaloo closed her eyes and flapped her one good wing desperately, eventually swallowing Applebloom's tongue. Big Macintosh, still holding the writhing Scootaloo down with his strong hooves, then mounted the orange filly and slid his penis into her tight virgin pussy, raping her for several minutes while Sweetie Belle watched, trembling with revulsion. Applebloom was still out cold, blood pouring from her torn-up mouth. Cutie Mark Crusaders rape victims, Big Macintosh said with tender mockery as he fucked Scootaloo, followed by a gentle chuckle. Guess y'all found your purpose in life now. Your special talent is getting raped. Yup. Eventually, he withdrew from Scootaloo and gripped her head tight and repeatedly punched her hard with a hoof in the face, causing her nose to shatter and spurt with blood. He scooped up some of the blood and some of Sweetie Belle's vomit with his tongue and held it in his mouth so that it mixed in with the saliva, then brought his mouth close to Scootaloo's and spat the rank mixture into her mouth. He clamped his hoof over her mouth and held her nose until she gagged and eventually had no choice but to swallow. As Scootaloo retched and spat and cried, he turned to Sweetie Belle. He grabbed her easily as she was too shocked and traumatized to respond, and with apparent amusement he rammed her horn up Scootaloo's ass. The horn was too big and hard, so the skin around Scootaloo's ass ripped and blood and fecal matter first trickled and then poured profusely down onto Sweetie Belle's face, as well as urine as Scootaloo pissed herself. You keep doing that, Sweetie Belle, he said. The unicorn carried on, pushing her horn up Scootaloo's anus, slowly but surely. Her normal, well-groomed pink and purple mane was now stained a reddish brown, glistening with the wetness of the piss and blood. If you stop, I'll come over there and, get creative. I may seem a bit dense, but I'm actually quite a creative stallion, Big Macintosh said with a wink. Yup. He went to Applebloom and penetrated his little sister's unconscious body with his hard cock. While he violated her, he got another knife, this one sharp and shiny, and sliced open her flank, causing her glistening intestines to flop out wetly onto the floor. He glanced over and was pleased to see Sweetie Belle was still using her horn to anally penetrate Scootaloo, and her face was now completely covered in blood and feces and urine. Well, I don't know about you, but I'm enjoying this in quite a big way. Anyways, this concludes part 1 of Sweet Apple Massacre. If you would like to see part 2, please click on the annotation located dead center upon Big Mac that just says, "Yup." Anyways, I'll see you all in part 2.